I can't recall the background music that night or the taste of the gingerbread, but I remember exactly how the wine glass was raised, how the blinking lights from the Christmas tree danced across Lena's face as she smiled, too wide, too rehearsed. We were all gathered around the dinner table. The tree sparkled behind us, and somewhere beyond the window, the neighbors' bells were still ringing. Lena turned to face everyone, my parents, our 2 kids, a few of her close friends, and spoke like she was making a toast at some fancy gala. Daniel and I have taken different paths, she began, voice steady, almost proud. I'm with Ethan now. Ethan was standing behind her, one hand resting on the back of her chair, eyes avoiding the room. Lena looked radiant, like she'd just signed a multi-million-dollar deal. No one said a word. Nathan slowly lowered his fork. Sophie let out a soft sob, her face flushed. My mom froze. My dad, without saying a thing, poured more wine into a glass that wasn't even empty yet. Then she kept going, like she thought more words might soften the blow. I know this isn't the right time, but I think everyone deserves to hear it from me. Ethan and we've been together for a while now. I can't keep living a lie. I set the unopened gift down on the table. Didn't move, didn't react. My face was blank. My heart was pounding but steady. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Thanks, I said, for choosing the perfect moment. No one laughed. No one raised a glass. Ethan suddenly seemed small in that room he clearly didn't belong in. Lena put her glass down, not as confident as she'd been just moments ago. As for me, I stood up, gathered the untouched plates, and started cleaning up like it was just another awkward holiday dinner. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 53, senior auditor at a major investment firm in Chicago. I spent nearly 3 decades building a family, managing our finances, protecting the woman I once believed would grow old with me. Numbers have always been my world, precise, transparent, no gray areas. Too bad marriage doesn't run on the same rules. I don't know if I lost more that night, a wife or just a long-running illusion. But I do know this. The moment she raised that glass was also the moment I stopped pretending I didn't see the cracks. If you've ever watched a seemingly perfect marriage start to fracture, stick around. And if something in this story hits close to home, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. You're not alone. We met back in 1995, both working at a mid-sized event planning company. Lena was an intern in the coordination department, quick on her feet, sharp, always lighting up a room the second she walked in. I was the opposite, the in-house accountant, tidy, punctual, and borderline militant about staying within budget. 3 years later, we got married. By then, I had transitioned to a small investment fund, and Lena was landing her first freelance gigs in the wedding scene. On our wedding day, Lena designed everything herself: backdrop, lighting, music. Me? I was the guy behind the spreadsheet, making sure the whole thing didn't go over budget. We bought this house when I was 31. Classic red brick place in a quiet neighborhood, about a 20-minute drive from downtown. Lena picked the curtains, the hardwood flooring, and every appliance in the kitchen. I picked the mortgage rate, the bank, and our 10-year payoff plan. We were a team, at least back then. For 27 years, I worked with balance sheets, and she worked with flowers, champagne, and stage lights. She had a gift for turning ordinary things into something worth remembering. I had a knack for taking chaos and organizing it into something that made sense. We had 2 kids, Nathan, now a software engineer, fully independent, and Sophie, finishing her senior year in communications. I used to think I'd done everything right. Financial stability, no debt, always encouraged Lena to pursue her passion without interference. But turns out, stability was no longer something she wanted. About 2 years ago, she started telling me I wasn't romantic anymore, that all I ever talked about was the property tax, the budget, the retirement fund. She said she wanted to feel alive again, to feel seen. She told me I wasn't the man who made her heart race anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't change. I thought it was just a phase. One of those low points every long-term couple hits. I figured it would pass. She started taking more gigs, especially evening events. She'd get home past midnight, smelling like strong perfume, saying she'd been wine tasting with clients. One night, she asked me not to call after 10 p.m. because she was often in a creative zone. I used to believe she was just reconnecting with her work, rediscovering her passion. Now I know it was the beginning of a whole other life, one I was no longer invited to be part of. I started noticing the small things, not through some dramatic revelation, but through the quiet, those stretched-out silences that used to be filled with casual affection. A white dress shirt hanging in the laundry room smelled off. Not mine. Not our usual detergent either. It was a heavy, sweet cologne. Definitely for men. Something I'd never wear. And something Lena never liked. I dropped it in the hamper without asking. A week later, I found out her phone had a new passcode. Lena used to be the kind of person who didn't care about that stuff. She'd leave her phone charging in the kitchen, unlocked, sometimes even asked me to text people back while she cooked. But now, it was always in her hand or face down. When I gently asked about it, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't need to control everything, Daniel." I nodded, said nothing, because sometimes the moment you have to ask is the moment you already know. One night, I got invited to the grand opening of a new lounge, something trendy, loud music, smoky cocktails, dim lighting. Not really my scene, but I wanted to support a friend, so I went. I walked in, barely 2 steps past the entrance, and my eyes instinctively scanned the bar. And there she was, Lena, with Ethan. He was younger. Shoulder-length brown hair, full-sleeve tattoo, pouring tequila like it was performance art. Lena sat at the bar, leaning in toward him. They weren't touching. But their eyes, the way they looked at each other, it was a conversation without words. I knew that look. Lena used to look at me like that years ago. I stood there for a few seconds, out of sight. Then I turned around and walked out like I'd never been there. That night, she came home just before 2 a.m. I pretended to be asleep. She tiptoed across the room, opened the closet, took off her shoes, let out the softest sigh. I stayed still, eyes wide open in the dark, asking myself the question I couldn't shake. What hurts more, the betrayal itself, or knowing it's happening and doing absolutely nothing? Christmas morning started with a call from an unknown number. I was making coffee in the kitchen, sky still dim, the fireplace crackling faintly in the living room. Lena was still upstairs sleeping, or pretending to be. Sophie had come home the night before. Nathan was on a flight in from Seattle. We were supposed to have one of those rare nights where everyone's under the same roof again. The phone rang at exactly 7:12 a.m. A man's voice came through, calm, polite. "Mr. Harper, this is Mason Grant. I'm the attorney for Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell. I'm calling about her estate. She passed away 3 weeks ago. I assume you've heard." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Aunt Eleanor, my mother's younger sister, lived alone out in Oregon. No husband, no children, and barely any contact with the rest of the family. I used to visit her every summer as a kid, but once adulthood kicked in, we only exchanged the occasional Christmas card and a rare phone call here and there. "She's left everything to you," Mr. Grant continued. 5 rental properties in Portland, a long-term investment portfolio, and full control of a scholarship fund for female students pursuing finance. The total value is estimated around $6.3 million. I sank into the chair behind me. My heart didn't race. It was more like something inside me opened up, empty at first, then slowly filled with something strange and weightless. Mr. Grant added, "And just so you know, all assets are listed explicitly as separate property, which means they're not subject to division in case of divorce or marital dispute. She made sure of that." I thanked him, set up a meeting for after the holidays, and hung up. I sat there a long time, coffee going cold in my hand. I had planned to tell the family that evening. Maybe while everyone was opening presents, I'd raise my glass, say something warm and heartfelt, share a bit of unexpected joy after a year full of uncertainty and change. That was the plan. But I'm glad I didn't, because that night I wasn't the one who stood up, and the thing being offered wasn't good news. It was a blade, hidden behind a glass of wine. Lena ended our marriage right there at the dinner table, in front of our 2 kids, in front of my entire family. And me, the man who became a millionaire in the morning, became the man whose wife left him by nightfall. That night, I remember exactly the moment Ethan stepped through the door. The door opened, cold air spilling in along with the soft chime of the wind bells hanging on the porch. He wore a black turtleneck sweater, hair neatly styled, holding a bottle of red wine wrapped carelessly in a brown paper bag, at least 15 years younger than anyone else in the room. His eyes scanned the space, polite, slightly self-assured, as if he belonged there, like he was supposed to be part of this evening. Lena stepped out from the kitchen just in time. She smiled, not over the top, but not shy either. "Ethan, you made it. Come in." Then she turned to the room and said, "This is Ethan, my colleague. He helped me with that big event last month. I invited him because I figured no one would mind an extra guest. No one said otherwise." My mother raised an eyebrow, then smiled politely. Nathan poured another glass of wine. Sophie glanced at me, waiting to see my reaction, but I just gave a small nod. To them, he was just a work friend. Maybe a little young, a little off from the family vibe, but not completely out of place at a holiday dinner like this. But I knew better. I knew that look in Lena's eyes, because I'd once been the man she looked at like that. And I knew that look wasn't reserved for colleagues. Ethan sat 2 seats away from me. He ate neatly, spoke softly, occasionally leaned in to whisper something to Lena. Nobody paid it much attention. Lena was talkative, laughing more than usual. Every now and then, her hand would touch his while she told a story. Quick, casual, but not invisible to me. I waited until dessert was served. Wine poured. Lights dimmed just slightly. Lena stood up, tapped her glass like she was about to thank someone for the pudding, and then dropped the bomb. "Daniel and I have gone our separate ways. I'm living with Ethan." Silence. Ethan set his glass down. Didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. Sophie let out a sob. Nathan clenched his fists, eyes locked on his dessert plate. My mother exhaled hard, like someone had just punched her in the gut. "And me?" I said one thing. "Thank you for picking the perfect moment. At least dinner's over?" No one laughed. I started gathering plates, calmly, deliberately, not rushed, like I'd done it 100 times before. Simple, repetitive, safe. The last thing I still had control over in a room that had just shattered. Then I left the table without asking to be excused. Walked into my office. Closed the door behind me. Outside, I could still hear the faint clinking of silverware. Inside, I turned on the light and began preparing for the one thing I now knew for sure. My time had just begun. You're watching the part where the truth finally speaks. If you've got thoughts, drop a comment. We read and truly value every word you share. I didn't ask Lena a single thing after that Christmas night. She packed her things in silence a few days later, telling Sophie she was just stepping out for a while to clear her head. But I knew. The decision had been made long before she ever stood up at that dinner table. What I needed now wasn't an explanation. What I needed was the truth. So I started combing through our finances, not just once, but line by line, with the kind of methodical focus only someone who spent a lifetime working with numbers can sustain. I pulled up 6 months' worth of bank statements, and this time I didn't just skim. I opened an Excel sheet, categorized every single transaction, cross-referenced it by date, merchant type, and location. It took me 2 straight nights, but eventually I had a number. $68,000, drained from our joint account in small, irregular transactions, each just under the alert threshold. A boutique spa in California. 2 nights at a lakefront hotel in Vermont. A trip to Tulum, Mexico, where Lena had claimed she was scouting venues for a client event. I didn't need to ask who went with her. I hired a forensic accountant through a friend at the bank. Not to sue, not yet. I just needed to confirm that what I suspected wasn't just gut instinct. 4 days later, he came back with a report. Lena's secondary credit card, linked to an account under my name, had been used for a long list of charges that had nothing to do with business. Expensive dinners, designer shopping, flights, even a brand new Vespa registered under the name Ethan Leclerc. I stared at the receipts and didn't even feel angry, just tired. But what made me go still for nearly a full minute was the last page. Under my name, Daniel Harper, a personal loan of $120,000 had been approved from the same bank we once used for our first mortgage. Purpose: to fund the launch of an event planning company. The authorized legal agent on the loan? Lena Harper. The signature at the bottom was my name, but it wasn't my handwriting. She had done it, forged my signature, taken out a loan to start her own company, all while using our joint funds to sustain her new life. I didn't throw anything, didn't scream, didn't smash a wine glass. I just placed my hand flat on the table, then added a new line to the folder I'd quietly started. Lena plan. Hire attorney. Verify legal protection of separate property. Prep withdrawal strategy for remaining assets before she makes her next move. I used to think of myself as a quiet man, but for the first time, I saw that quiet as a strategic advantage. Because when you say nothing, they assume you know nothing. And that's exactly when they make their biggest mistake. 3 days after Christmas, a thick envelope arrived by express courier, stamped in red from Mason Grant's law office. I opened it in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the low hum of the heater. Inside was the complete file on Aunt Eleanor's estate. An itemized valuation, proof of ownership for 5 rental properties in Portland, scholarship fund documentation, and the paperwork to officially transfer control of her investment portfolio. All of it had already been confirmed as separate property, legally and entirely outside the bounds of our marriage. Lena had no claim. Not now. Not in a divorce. I called Mason. He offered to come by the house for convenience. I agreed, not because it was convenient, but because I'd just gotten a message that Lena would be stopping by to pick up the last of her things. I wanted her to see this. We sat at the dining table, the same place where just 3 nights ago she'd told everyone she was leaving me. The documents lay neatly across the table, each page marked with yellow post-its. Mason spoke with the speed and clarity of someone who'd guided hundreds of clients through post-divorce asset protection. We were discussing ways to shield the investment portfolio from potential legal claims on Lena's side when the front door creaked open. "Forgot a few things," Lena called out from the hallway. Ethan followed behind her, dangling her car keys in his hand like a nervous intern on the first day of work. I didn't say a word. Neither did Mason. We kept talking, unbothered, as if no one else had entered the house. Lena went straight upstairs to the bedroom. Ethan wandered awkwardly into the living room, glancing around like he still wasn't used to being inside a home he once snuck into on the back of a secret affair. Then he saw the papers on the table. His eyes flicked across the bolded, all-caps heading. Separate property of Mr. Daniel Harper, per last will and testament of Eleanor Mitchell. I saw him freeze. Nobody said anything. But I knew. It only took a few words on that page to shake the overgrown confidence right out of him. Lena came downstairs, carrying a leather bag and a coat. She started toward the front door, but Mason stood up. And for the first time, the contempt in his eyes wasn't subtle. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, calmly, quietly, but every word sharp as glass, "What a shame. You left a man who just became a millionaire for a kid who still doesn't qualify for a credit card." Lena stopped in her tracks. Ethan's face flushed, but he didn't look up. And me? I took a slow sip of my coffee and said, "Don't worry, Mason. We've got plenty more to work on. The people who don't belong here won't be coming around much longer." No one walked them to the door. There was no need, because I wasn't the man who got left at Christmas dinner anymore. I was the man taking it all back, 1 page at a time. That afternoon, I asked Mason to put everything together, meticulously, clear records, clean separation, every withdrawal, every shady transaction, and a copy of the loan contract bearing my forged signature. Mason didn't say much. He'd seen too many cases like this to be surprised. But when he got to the loan document, I caught the shift in his expression. Part disdain, part practiced professionalism. like he was watching an old play with a new cast, this time starring a woman a little too confident in her own script. I set the meeting for 6 p.m., told Lena and Ethan we needed to finalize a few things before the divorce. She agreed right away, probably thought it was just logistics. She didn't see it coming. When they arrived, I was already seated at the dining table, the same seat I'd been in on Christmas night. Only this time, there was no dinner, just a thick folder waiting across from me, laid neatly in front of 2 empty chairs. I invited them to sit. Lena walked in like she still belonged in the house. Ethan followed closely, quieter than last time. Maybe after his encounter with Mason, he'd begun to understand just how far out of his depth he was, and how big the gap really was. I didn't waste time. I slid the folder across the table to Lena. She opened it, flipped through the first few pages, paused when she hit the bank statements. The red markings were impossible to miss. Her face lost color when she reached the loan document with my name and her forged signature. Ethan leaned over, squinting, clearly confused but visibly uneasy. I looked at them. No anger, no sarcasm, just calm. And then I said, "I've signed the divorce papers. They'll be filed first thing Monday. I'm not asking for anything from you. Everything has already been declared as separate property." No dispute. I paused. "But I've also sent a full copy of this file to my attorney, just in case you try to deny it or spin it into some kind of misunderstanding." Lena didn't speak. Her hands gripped the folder tighter. Ethan leaned in, whispering something, but she didn't respond. They both knew the game was over. I stood, walked to the cabinet near the door, and returned with a small tray. "And finally, I need you to leave the house keys, both the original and the spare. This isn't your home anymore." She looked at me, and for the first time in all the years we'd been together, there was no anger in her eyes. No superiority, no disappointment, just defeat, plain and heavy. She quietly pulled the keyring from her bag, placed it on the tray, and didn't look up. I nodded. "Thank you. You can go now." No one said a word. No one walked them out. No one looked back. And I stood there in the house that was finally mine, truly mine, for the first time in years. And I didn't feel loss. I felt peace. Mason sent me a detailed update from the bank, confirming that the $120,000 loan taken out under my name was still active and being repaid on schedule. Which meant that even though I'd never signed that document, the system still saw me as the borrower. I knew I couldn't let that continue. Mason and I immediately submitted a formal dispute to the lender, complete with samples of my actual signature, copies of my ID, and a report from a handwriting expert verifying that the loan document had been forged. The game had entered a new phase. Lena received a copy of the dispute from my lawyer. 1 week later, she reached out, not to apologize for the first time, but to negotiate. We met again in Mason's office. No tears, no dramatic apologies. I got straight to the point. "You know you could be prosecuted for financial fraud, right?" She nodded. She knew. Very clearly. Mason slid a file across the table. "We've already prepared a civil complaint along with supporting evidence, signature analysis, flagged bank transactions, and surveillance footage from the notary office where the documents were filed." I cut in. "I don't want to take this to court, not for your sake, but for mine and our kids." I paused. "So here's what I'm offering. I won't press charges if you pay back the full $120,000 within 6 months on a repayment schedule Mason will draft and oversee." Lena finally spoke. I don't have the money." Ethan left. No goodbye. Just maxed out cards and a promise he'd find his path and come back. I had expected that. "You have a business. You have furniture, a car, personal assets. You can sell them, mortgage something. I don't care how. It just needs to be repaid under your name. None of this should fall on me." I looked her dead in the eye. "If not, the file goes straight to the DA's office." She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want this to go any further. I know I messed up. I just want it to stop. Here." I didn't respond. Mason glanced at me, waiting. I slid 3 printed conditions across the table. No negotiation, no discussion, just the terms. First, Lena will fully relinquish any claim to the house. No rights to return, no demands for equity, and no mention of the divorce to friends, family, or the press. Second, the $68,000 siphoned from our joint account must be returned in full within 3 months. Failure to comply would activate immediate filing of the fraud and forgery claims. Lena bowed her head, breathing slow, almost silent. I understand. I leaned back and laid out the third condition. But I'm not interested in stripping away your chances completely. We're no longer husband and wife, but I know you once had a real passion for event planning. I nodded to Mason. He handed her another folder. This is a contract for a launch event at one of the commercial properties in Eleanor's portfolio. You'll handle the planning. Just once. No ownership, no inflated pay. Just a chance. If you really want to rebuild something for yourself. Lena looked up, shock flickering under a layer of shame. She said nothing. After a few seconds, she gave a quiet nod. I stood up, shook Mason's hand, and walked out of that conference room without looking back. Outside, the snow had just started to fall. I pulled on my coat, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not vengeance. Just the quiet clarity of knowing I'd finally ended it, at the right time and in the right way. 6 months after Lena signed the divorce papers, I stood in my glass-walled office on the 18th floor of a renovated building in downtown Portland. The new sign had just gone up that morning. The Eleanor Foundation, empowering through education. I'm the legal representative and chairman of the scholarship fund. I still do audit work, but only part-time now. Most of my days go toward community projects and mentoring low-income students. I live in a modest penthouse. Simple, quiet. Just a few blocks from Sophie's place. She stops by now and then to cook, or sometimes just to sit with old music playing in the background and ask me questions that come out of nowhere like, "Did you love Mom that much?" I never dodge it. I did love her. But sometimes, love isn't enough to make someone stay. And it's definitely not enough to blur numbers, especially when those numbers tell a truth your heart doesn't want to hear. Nathan still lives in Chicago. After that Christmas night, he didn't say much. He just quietly helped clear the table, hugged his sister, and walked out of the house without looking back. 2 weeks later, he sent me an email, just one line. "I don't know what happened between you and Mom, but I'm with you." We keep in touch. Not constantly, but enough to know he's doing all right. Nathan's a lot like I was at his age. Guarded, observant, and once trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. He hasn't spoken to his mother since. Sophie told me Lena tried calling him a few times, but he never responded. I didn't encourage it, but I didn't stand in the way either. Everyone heals differently. For Nathan, healing came through distance. Lately, he started to open up more. When I mentioned expanding the foundation's scholarships to other states, he messaged back, "If you need an independent auditor, I'm in." I knew what that meant. I trust you. And for me, that was everything. Lena moved out of state, headed south, somewhere her name isn't tied to a nearly criminal fraud case. Her small business, according to Mason, quietly shut down. No announcement, no noise. As for Ethan, he vanished from social media. Nobody talks about him anymore. I don't care to ask. This morning, I sat by the window, coffee in hand, reviewing the scholarship plan on my laptop. The header glowed across the screen. Funding Future Women in Accounting, Pilot Year Program. I chuckled, quietly, to myself. Lena once said I lived for numbers. She wasn't wrong. But maybe it was the numbers, the clarity, the honesty, the refusal to lie, that pulled me out of a life built on quiet deception. A life I once thought was stable, just because it didn't make noise. Now I choose to live differently. Not because I'm broken, but because I made it through. As a man who was betrayed, but not destroyed. A man who learned that peace doesn't come from holding on to someone, but from knowing when to finally let go. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. If you believe that calm strength and quiet wisdom can be the answer to betrayal, share this video. Someone out there might need that strength today.